All right, everybody. It has only been 6 days since we last recorded, but man, a lot has gone down with the Celtics. So we get a lot to get into. Free agency, the team's up for sale. People are moving all over the NBA, and hey, the Celtics drafted a couple of guys. So we're going to give you our thoughts on all of that coming up next here on Green with Envy. Let's lock in. What up, what up, what up? Welcome into another edition of Green with Envy. As always, this is your boy Will We're checking in. How you doing? How you living? Joining me today, still on baby watch, so we get him for at least one more episode, is my best friend, co-host, and the coach of our podcast, rocking his fresh championship gear. It's the one and only Greg Menakis. What's good?
It's good, man. I'm actually excited that the baby's holding off because a lot has happened with the Celtics, a lot of news. And I was like, are we not going to be able to talk about this? Like, this deserves multiple podcasts, and we're going to have to squeeze it all into one. So I'm happy that we get this chance. I'm happy that the baby has decided to wait until his due date or beyond. And we can just talk about all the crazy stuff going on in the world of the Boston Celtics, because there is a lot, and most of it's good.
Yeah, lot of movement, and like we really expected this to be kind of a slower time, and we were like, not much is gonna happen. You know, I was away for a little bit. Thought maybe the baby might be here by now. We were like, we won't miss much. We'll cover what happens with other teams. But man, the Celtics did not decide to take a break after winning the championship. So let's kind of get into it here, Greg. And first off, we'll start off here. There's some news, obviously, from Wyc Grousbeck that will play into everything that we're going to talk about. But as Wyc is potentially putting the team up for sale, let's talk about the spending binge that the Celtics are going on. So just to get us recalibrated, the Boston Celtics, after winning a championship, I'm going to run through what has happened with the Celtics since they have won the championship and since free agency has opened. And then we can kind of go from there and touch on a whole bunch of different topics that we can get into. But let me start here. Let's just set this up here. Here are the keynotes that you need to know about the Boston Celtics offseason so far. Let's start with the most obvious. Jason Tatum gets the max extension at 5 years, $314 million, becoming the highest paid player in NBA history. And they'll be surpassed at some point, just like we went through this with Jaylen Brown. But Jason Tatum officially gets the bag, 5 years, $314 million. Next up, DWhite. And this is probably the biggest move of all this offseason. The Jason Tatum one we knew was coming. DWhite, 4 years and $126 million. Now, the important part about DWhite taking this extension now, he could have played the season out, hit the open market. There was a number that the Celtics couldn't exceed for this extension number. DWhite took a hometown discount to remain here with the Boston Celtics for 4 years. Make absolutely no mistake about it. We'll talk more about that here, but 4 years and $126 million. So DWhite locked in now for the next 5 years total with the Boston Celtics. Sam Hauser, Celtics pick up their $2.1 million option on him. He is back in the fold for this upcoming season. They do still have an opportunity to negotiate an extension with him, but can't do that for about another week or so. I believe July 9th is the first date. So potentially, Wyc Moneybags might be handing out some more cash to Sam Hauser here in just a little bit. Luke Kornet back on a 1-year deal. Haven't seen what the finances are on that, but probably around about the minimum, maybe a little bit more for Luke Kornet. And then Neemias Queta, and this just came out right before we hopped on here, 3-year deal, 3-year multi-year deal for Neemias Queta to come back to the Celtics. Keith Smith had that. Looks like most likely this is the end of the line for O'Shea Brissett as a Celtic. Xavier Tillman, TBD. I don't think I've seen any movement with him yet, but we'll have to see how that plays out. And of course, and we'll talk about this at the end of the podcast here, Celtics, NBA draft night, Brad Stevens decides to finally make a first-round pick for the first time in his POBO career. Baylor Shireman is who comes in from University of Creighton, and then they make their second-round pick, Anton Watson, out of Gonzaga. We'll talk about them in just a minute. And Greg, this is all capped off by the juicy news that Wyc Grousbeck, who, despite saying on Paul Pierce's podcast about a month ago, Celtics were not for sale, apparently they're very much for sale, is actually what is going to happen. And it looks like they are going to be put up for sale by the end of this year or early 2025 with some kind of strange language that he'll still be the governor until 2028. So I don't know. We'll have to get someone in here that can explain some of the verbiage of how that all works and the mechanics of it. But Greg, I just gave you a whole lot of info of stuff that happened in basically about a 24 to 48 hour window. Where do you want to start with this? Because there's a lot for us to talk about.
Let's start with the Wick stuff. We got a comment here from Celtics Canada. He asked a question: do you think Wick put the team up for sale because the partners didn't want multiple years of huge losses? The second apron can do that.
Second
Shout out
apron is a
Celtics.
boogeyman right now across the NBA. You can see it left and right, especially from the Clippers and the Warriors of the world that had no problem paying the tax before.
That's right. That's right. The second apron is definitely doing its damage. I have an overlay here. I just want to pull up. This is at Danger Carts. Tax salary tax workbook over the next couple of years. Shout out at Danger Cart. Make sure you go follow him. So we have here the tax bill that the Celtics would pay in 25-26 if they decided to bring everybody back from the top 5. Al Horford's deal obviously is over after next season, right? So if you look at the 25-26 yearbook here, tax book here, we have 253,000 million. Sorry, $253 million of estimated tax in 25-26. So they would estimated total spend would be roughly what their tax
basically
bill
about
in
a half
25-26.
a $500 million is what we're looking at.
Yeah, but exactly. But their tax bill in 25-26 would be what they'd be spending roughly on the team in 24-25. That's just an insane amount to ask anybody to do. So it does make sense that they would put the team up for sale right now, because you're in a win-win situation if you're Wick, right? Because you sign all these guys to the extensions, and then somebody else has to come in and they have to deal with the problem. They're either going to keep the team together, right? Or they're going to have to come in and be the bad guy and trade a Jason Tatum or trade a Jaylen Brown or trade a Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis, right? There's so many guys that could be traded because we have so many big contracts, but it's going to be really interesting to see where the Celtics kind of go from there. Once Wick does sell the team, it stinks that he's selling the team because he's been such a good owner. There was Steve Pags, whatever his last name is. I can't pronounce his last name. He did say that he was going to, something like that. He said he was going to be part of the bidding war. That's definitely going to happen here. So it'll be really interesting. It stinks that Wick's going to sell the team after so vehemently denying that he was going to do that a month ago. But hey, man, get the bag while you can.
I mean, listen, he back in 2002, I forget the exact price, but it's like mid 300s, like 350-ish million is what he bought the team for. In the latest Forbes, estimate of what the Celtics are, they're about a $4.5 billion team. Now, all it takes is one person to go above that. So there's a chance they could be a $5 billion team. That's a pretty damn good return. Listen, like I kind of get it. And, when you're going to be paying that type of tax, and this is the issue, or part of the issue, Wick's not one of the wealthier owners in the NBA, right? Like that's the Steve Ballmer, even Mark Cuban reign, but you're seeing Mark Cuban sold his majority stake this past season. So, it's interesting to think about the ways in which finances of the NBA and really the sports world in general are operating right now, because I said this when I think we talked a little bit about like how baseball contracts and MLB or an NBA contracts just going up and up. And to me, it's like there has to be a breaking point. Not everyone can just be making $100 million. I mean, it feels like we're only a couple years away from everybody making $100 million per season. Jason Tatum's new contract, he's going to be making $70 million per year by the end of it. Shohei Ohtani is already making that. And so these teams are, once they're worth $5 billion, like if you bought this team for $5 billion, is it really going to be worth $8 billion? Or 10 billion in 10 years? Like, I don't know, maybe it is, but like to me, it's just so mind boggling, the economics that there has to be a breaking point. And it feels like to me, smart guys like Wick, like Cuban, there's still some regional TV money deals that I've read about that are like going to kind of like shape how the NBA looks, because social media and apps, streaming apps and all that are changing the way that traditionally all of the revenue has been set up, that maybe they're getting ahead of it and they're trying to get out at the peak. So I don't know how this is going to play out, but I just can't imagine that in 10 years or 15 years, that now all these teams are now just worth 10 to 15 billion and every superstar is making 90 to 100 million. But maybe that's where it's going. Maybe money's just fake and this is how the world works. I don't know. I'm not sure, but it's crazy to think about.
Yeah, but let's move on to the guys, because
Yeah.
we're going to talk about Wick selling the team so many more times over the next year or so. But Jason Tatum's deal, obviously that was the thing that everybody was hoping would get done this offseason as quickly as possible. Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, they are the cornerstones of this franchise. So shout out to JT for getting the richest contract in NBA history. Derek White's deal, though, man, I think that point, I'm glad that you kind of started with that, because as you said, he could have played out this year. And when you look at the other guys that were getting $35-40 million this offseason, like Emmanuel Quickly getting 35 million. I think you had tweeted out, like, if IQ is worth 35 million, what is Derek White worth?
I was terrified. I assumed the extension was off the table at that point once Quickly got 35, because that's, what is Derek White, $45 million, 40 million at even if it's an overpay for Quickly, he's at least 40 million compared to 35. So yeah, it was pretty impressive that, I mean, you know what, it's not, I'm not gonna, it definitely is impressive by Brad Stevens to get it done, but more so than that, it's a reflection of how Derek White feels about the situation and this team, right? And we always say it before, it's not likely that this usually happens. We've seen like Bobby Portis take like a better or a worse contract financially to like stay with a team that he was really happy with. So it's always an outside chance that happens with players, but it's so rare. And especially for a guy like Derek White, when we've all heard his story a million times, from JUCO to, I think it was D2 to 1 year at Colorado, which is how he got drafted. And we've seen the pictures of, he in ninth grade, certainly doesn't look like he's going to the NBA. You see what LeBron James, you see what Jason Tatum looked like in high school. You're like, oh yeah, I could totally envision those guys in the NBA. Derek White was not that vision. And so this could have been his one real, like, I mean, 126 million is a lot of money, a lot of life-changing money. That really could have been closer to 180. Like I don't know if it's 180, but if it's 150 even, you're passing up $25 million to make this deal. So that shows to you how important the culture that the Celtics have set up. And even as Wick is potentially, on the way out here, he's making sure that everybody is taken care of. That really was a major part of setting up what that culture is, and how it can, capitalize on this moment. Because let's be real, this is a moment for this franchise that they are going all in to capitalize on. They've always said if they had the right team, they would do it, and they're backing it up right now.
Yeah, it's great to see, especially when you consider like other teams, NBA champions over the past 15 years or so, and how many of them actually bring back their entire squad. You know what I mean? Like, of their top 8, the Celtics are bringing back everybody from their top 8, right? And then you think to the Denver Nuggets, when you look at them
That's
losing
exactly
Jeff
what I was
Green
thinking.
and Bruce Brown last year, right? They lose KCP to the Magic, which is going to be a huge loss for them. KCP wasn't awesome in the playoffs, but KCP is a huge part of that team. And the fact that they gave all that money to Michael Porter Jr., who's definitely not worth that money, right? And they have to make a decision. Oh, we have to let KCP walk when he's only making $22 million a year, roughly. I think it's 3 years, 66 that he
3
got.
years, 66.
So like, the Celtics, the way that they're doing business, the way that they're willing to go into the second apron and face all the tax penalties and the potential repeater tax, that says something about what this ownership group thinks about their legacy within this city, that is all about hanging banners, right? And then you juxtapose that with the Nuggets. You think back to, you mentioned Mark Cuban, but when they won the title back in 2011 or 2012, whenever that was, and they didn't bring back their team, right? I think they let Tyson Chandler walk in the offseason. That was a
Bill
big thing
Simmons is
for
always
them.
big about how that's one of the worst championship defenses, and that like kind of bothers him as far as their, like, the title itself is like one of, because it was so unexpected, right? And you're going up against the Heatles, but then to just basically kind of on the next season throw the towel in, it's, you want to see that champion go, even if they don't defend, like kind of go out swinging, right?
Yeah.
And this team's coming back full strength, right? The Celtics, we're going to talk about what other teams in the East have done and what some have not done, but the Celtics are without a doubt going to go into next season as the favorite in the NBA because they're willing to bring all these guys back and do so in a way that all of these guys really are secure, right? Like there's other than Sam, and we'll see because that extension negotiation hasn't happened yet. But all these guys are going into next year knowing that they feel secure, right? And you're seeing
Mhm.
how Klay Thompson's end of his career is playing out in the Warriors, how Paul George played out with the Clippers, right? And both those guys were kind of sitting around all season, like, okay, you paid Kawhi, cool. You paid Draymond. Where's my money? You know,
Right.
where like, how do you feel about me? And I don't know that would have changed those teams' fortunes, but you're seeing reports now where it's like, man, Clay's not the demonstrative guy that Draymond is, but behind the scenes, this is the first year that people were like, man, Clay was kind of difficult. People talked about like Paul George was like kind of like unhappy of like, all right, you guys are negotiating with Kawhi. Like we were a package deal. How come you're not
Mhm.
talking to me about what's going on?
Especially when I'm the healthier player.
Right, exactly. And so the Celtics are like, let's get rid of all that. They locked up KP last year, locked up Holiday before the end of the season this year, and now Jason Tatum's locked in. Now, obviously, Jaylen Brown last year as well. Tatum this offseason, White this offseason, Pritchard last year. They brought back even some of the deeper bench guys like we talked about, Luke Cornett, Nemias Queta. We'll see what happens with Sam Hauser. And so if you're the Celtics, you got to feel really strong. And this is the thing, and this is part of why the second apron is so scary. They're going to be really limited on any other moves outside of the. So this is where I'm a little bit curious to get your thoughts on, Greg. Luke Cornett back on a 1-year deal, Nemias Queta back on a multi-year deal. We know that Kristaps Porzingis, successful surgery, great to hear. Out 5 to 6 months. You're going in probably at least 2 months of the season, roughly, maybe 2 to 3 months of the season without Kristaps. Al's another year older. You got to worry about, what that's going to look like for him. So I'm expecting some pretty big minutes early in the season for both Luke Cornett and Nemias Queta. How do you feel about them bringing them back into the fold and kind of keeping that continuity with the team and especially in that front court?
I love that they brought them back. I think Luke is like the security blanket for the team for Joe Mazzulla. He knows that he can rely on Luke through an 82 game stretch. Queta obviously had some great moments throughout the season that got everybody excited again, got us
Yeah,
feeling the feels that we felt with Robert Williams back in the day. Like that's what Queta was doing for the fan base. And he showed enough potential where the luxury of having a championship in the bag this season allows you to experiment even more during the regular season.
right.
You can play Luke Cornett 25 minutes a game. You could have a game where you're like, Al, you know what? You're sitting tonight and we don't care because we already have a championship and it's all about banner 19 now. This regular season doesn't really matter that much until we get to, jockeying for seeding, because we're going to talk about all the things that have happened in the East and all the teams that have improved. But you can say, hey, Queta, this is a huge development season for you, and it's not going to happen in Maine. The first 5 months of the season, it's going to be about your development this year, right? Luke Cornett, you're on a 1-year deal. Thank you for signing that. You are going to get a chance to showcase your talents for the rest of the league, because either you're going to be worth us bringing you back when Al
Right.
Horford maybe retires, or you can go get money elsewhere. And I think that's such an important part of why the championship was so big this year, because it allows you to sit Porzingis for 5 months
Mm-hmm.
when doctors on Twitter say that it's a 2-month injury, 2-month surgery. You can bring him back whenever you need to bring him back. And as we saw this year, it doesn't mean sitting him and resting him is going to lead to a healthy postseason, but it definitely reduces the chance of him getting hurt during a meaningless regular season game now that we have 18 in the bag.
Yeah, I think that's well said, and I think now for this team, you're hoping you get that development right from Queta. Like I think that's probably gonna be one of the things I'm looking for most early in the season is how much opportunity Queta is given to see really what that impact is. I know at times in the postseason there would be people that would say on Twitter or just fans in general, like, what about Queta? We need like a little spark. Well, you're gonna get that opportunity this season, right? That's gonna be a big development story for the Celtics. When you look at that front court. And like you said, winning a championship gives you this opportunity to feel secure that this is, and I think for the regular season, we talk about this a lot. Like we stressed at the beginning of the year, like, is Luke going to be okay? In the regular season, it's totally fine. Postseason, I think once you start getting star players playing 38, 40, 42
And
minutes
teams game
in the
planning for you.
right, exactly. That's a little bit of a different story, and that's where potentially I think Queta might, if he develops, could be more of a postseason player than what we saw from from Luke Cornett, but this is where you got to find out. And so the Celtics will have that opportunity. So we'll see what else they do to fill out the roster. We'll talk about their draft picks here in just a little bit. But busy days, man. I really didn't expect all of this news to come so quickly for the Celtics, but it felt like Brad Stevens and Wick wanted to get their shopping list done in basically the first 36 hours of free agency and just kind of knock everything off the list. So a very busy couple of days here for the Celtics. But of course, you mentioned it, Greg. That actually really lined up with the launch of NBA free agency as a whole. And there's definitely some movement that I know that we want to talk about here. I know in the last podcast that we did, I think right after we recorded, the Mikal Bridges trade to the Knicks went down. And so you gave some of your thoughts on that. So I want to tie these first two teams together. So basically what I want to do here, Greg, is I'm going to go through kind of team by team here of some of the moves that were made. And we'll just kind of give our thoughts of what we think of them and maybe how it affects the Celtics. But let's start with the two teams in the East that I think made obviously the most significant moves to close that gap between themselves and the Celtics. So we'll start with the Knicks here, just because I just mentioned them. They make the Mikal Bridges trade, Bogdanovich, and basically about five to six picks and pick swaps all go out. So it's a hefty price to pay for Mikal Bridges, but that coincides with OG Anunoby coming back on what was a pretty expensive deal, but man had a lot of leverage because that deal would not have made a lot of sense if you were to trade for Bridges and not bring back OG. So they bring back OG. They do lose Isaiah Hartenstein, which I think is a big piece to them, to the Thunder, who we can talk about here in a minute as well. But let's stick on the Knicks here for a minute, Greg. Bridges in, OG back, Hartenstein out. I know you kind of laid out what their starting lineup and their rotation looks like. Now that confirmed Hartenstein won't be there, does that change any of your thoughts on that particular move?
I mean, it all depends on Robinson's health. If Mitchell Robinson, very much like Porzingis, if he can be healthy in the playoffs, I think it changes a lot of what the Knicks offer, just because he's such
Mhm.
an imposing force inside. Obviously, he can't really do much with the ball in his hands, but he's such a great offensive rebounder, and he's huge. He's the same
Yeah.
size as Joel Embiid. He's a ginormous human being. So the Celtics have always kind of had issues keeping him off the glass, but we do have ways to exploit him. When I felt like the Knicks' best chance to play against the Celtics was with Hartenstein at the center guarding Porzingis. I said that from the very first game. We played them in the first game of the season last year. Remember being on a text thread with Liptak and being like, I think Hartenstein's your guy against us. I don't think it's Robinson. So
The
I
game
think
was dramatically different with Hartenstein in that first game, and you saw it in the subsequent games. Even though Celtics went 3-1 versus the Knicks, minus that late season beat down at the Garden where everything was already locked up, they were tight games, and it
Mhm.
was always because Hartenstein was getting more minutes over Mitchell Robinson.
Yeah, and I think Hartenstein just matches up a lot better with the Celtics than Robinson did. And I think losing Hartenstein is tough, but you weren't going to
Yeah.
pay Hartenstein $29 million, talking about what we were talking about earlier with Emmanuel Quickley getting $35 million. That's another former Knick, right? Two former Knicks that are getting a combined almost
Yeah,
$70 million or whatever that
pretty
is. Like,
crazy.
that's an
Yeah.
insane amount for role players. Emmanuel Quickley is a role player at this point. He does have a little bit more potential. It's some, I don't think he's ever going to be like his Kentucky teammate Maxey, but he does have a
Mhm.
lot of Maxey in his game. And then Hartenstein was the missing piece that was able to go to a team that just was fortunate enough to have a ton of cap space where they could
Yeah. It's a
spend
perfect
on a
fit
role
too.
player, right? They could spend on a role player. And, we'll talk about OKC here in a second, but I think losing Hartenstein is a huge deal for the Knicks because they didn't get Drummond. Drummond went to the Sixers. We're talking about the Sixers here in a
Mhm.
second. There's not a ton of big men on the open market. Like Bamba might still be out there. I don't know if he signed
He
with
just
anybody
signed.
yet.
He just signed with the Clippers earlier
Okay.
today. I did see, and this was just one of those like aggregate rumors, but that the Knicks might try to get involved in some Walker Kessler trades if the Jazz are willing to part with him. I don't necessarily know what that would look like, but that was
Mm.
just, I know that the Lowry marketing rumors are out there, so maybe it's something that coincides with that. And it's a 3-team trade, and I like I said, I don't know what that looks like, but the bigger point being, as soon as the Bridges trade was made, I get why they overpaid, and I think they should have, and I think it made their team better. my first thought was if you re-sign OG and you can get Hartenstein. Now they were limited to what they could pay Hartenstein. They could only go to, I think it was like 4 years and 72 million. He got basically 3 years, 90 from the Thunder. So not much debate there. And this was kind of the issue the Celtics could have run into next year with DWhite, where their extension number versus what he could have got in the open market might have made it, unable for them to retain him. So that's why it's so important that he did come back right now as opposed to waiting to next offseason. And I said that, if they bring back OG and Hartenstein, this is a team that's ready to compete with the Celtics. They're right there. They have all the pieces they need to match up. I still think the Celtics I would give the Celtics the edge talent-wise, but if the Celtics are even dinged up a little bit, and honestly, like the guys, the edge might be Jalen Brunson. Jalen Brunson, I think, is a guy that could succeed in this environment and be a difference maker. And really, if we're playing a bunch of tight games, Jalen Brunson was pretty elite at closing down the stretch of games. And that was something the Celtics, who got underappreciated for their ability to play in the clutch, didn't have to do a ton. Like that's part of the issues. They didn't have to do a ton. The Knicks live in the clutch. It's kind of like, that Bane and Batman fight where like, oh, you thought the darkness was your ally, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of where Brunson and the Knicks live. And so when you up their talent level with now Mikal Bridges, and I just, aside from the Nova fit, I like the way you put it in the last episode in the open, they kind of went all in on a vibe. Right. This is kind of what they're going for, which probably a little bit risky, but I'm a big Mikal Bridges guy. And I think him in this third best player role, that's kind of that's a perfect spot for him. That's
calling Randall their second best.
Calling Randall their second, which I know has its own potential issues, and we'll have to see how that plays out. Because with OG and when they had everybody healthy, the Knicks were rolling. Right. And that included Randall for part of that. So I'm curious to see what that looks like. And I think what they're going to have to do now, because I don't trust Robinson being healthy. We'll see what else they add as far as front court depth. I'm really curious to see how quickly and how okay they are with going to Randall at the 5. Going to Randall at the 5, you've got OG, you've got Bridges, you've got Brunson. Depending on the matchup, you can use DiVincenzo, you can use Hart, you can use McBride in that other guard spot. I think Hart would be, if you're trying to size up, that's probably the guy. But like I said, it gives you a little bit more variability. But I'm very curious to know what that looks like, because I think with Mikal and with OG, they're just bigger wings that kind of like the Celtics were able to do with Tatum. They might give you the ability to kind of do that same angle for the Knicks. And so that's going to be fascinating matchups for next year, maybe the next couple of years to come.
I'm going to throw some names out there for you, whether this is for the Knicks, for the Celtics, with their vet mins that they have available, just some big men that are out there right now. Robert Covington, Dario Saric,
okay,
Marcus Morris.
I don't know if I consider Robert Covington a big, but I'll let him in this club.
He's played some small 5 in his career.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. None of those necessarily move the needle for me. I would say when I think of Dario Saric, I'm thinking of like what the best version of Dario Saric was, and I don't think that's necessarily who he is anymore, right? So
he was on the Warriors last year, right? He was
on the Warriors and was okay, right? Like, close to 40, I think the potential of what Dario Saric could be would be the guy that I would be most interested in out of that group, because I think he's just, he's a good ball mover, can shoot a little bit. Marcus Morris, I don't need any more Marcus Morris.
Yeah,
especially if I'm the Celtics, definitely on the Knicks. I don't think it does. It's just a worse version of Julius Randle is basically what you're getting with Marcus Morris. I don't think you need that. But yeah, so I think Dario Saric in general would be the most interesting name. I think it's really, like I said, if Walker Kessler is available, or if there's a trade that the Knicks can make for a guy that's like undervalued at the right price point, because Walker Kessler is still on a rookie contract. So I think that's why it makes that potentially an option. Like, I think that would be a name where that would give you more stability and a little bit more versatility. With a guy like that. But we'll have to see, because I think the Knicks need to address that front court depth. But I still think it's definitely an upgrade. You add Bridges, you bring back OG. This is a very positive offseason for the Knicks. And let's talk about the Sixers, because you brought up Tyrese Maxey. He gets his extension. We kind of knew that was good, very much like Jason Tatum, that we knew that was kind of coming. The big move, they had a ton of cap space, and it was, are they going to get anybody? Are they going to have to roll it over? They go and get Paul George. They get in a 4-year max, $212 million. They also, you mentioned the Andre Drummond signing. They bring Kelly Oubre back on a really nice deal. I was surprised they
What
got
is
Kelly
going on with
Oubre.
Kelly Oubre's agent?
Dude, what was it? I think it was 2 years, 16, 2
16
years,
million?
17. Like, that was
That's in,
surprising, right? That he got Oubre was great for them last year. I thought Oubre was awesome. I've always kind of liked Oubre. It didn't work that year in Golden State. Like, that was a disaster. He wasn't a good fit for that. But I've always kind of liked him a little bit in Washington. And then last year, I thought he was awesome for the Sixers. Like, I thought he
he
made
should
a
he should
massive
be
difference
getting
when he was out there.
16 million a year minimum, not for 2
Yeah.
years.
Yeah, it's an absolute steal for them to get him to come back on that number for 2 years. And then Eric Gordon, which, I think was pretty low money, but like, it's another shooting option. They do lose the Anthony Melton to the Warriors. I think that's a little bit, and Nick
They
Batum
lose
back to the
Batum.
Clippers. Yep. So those are some underrated losses, but overall, obviously, getting Maxey on the extension, bring in Paul George, Oubre back. I think those are the big moves for the Sixers. And I'm a bigger Paul George guy than you are. Even I've started to wane on Paul George over the last couple of years. What do you make of that big three? Maxey, Paul George, Embiid. How much closer are they to the Celtics and maybe even the Knicks, who we just talked about?
It's tough, man, because Embiid's obviously an MVP type player.
Mm-hmm. He's
Is
not
he?
healthy.
Is
Yeah,
he? Like, I mean,
you got to be on the court. That's the thing, and Paul George has the same issue. So that's kind of where I'm not ready to like it. Like, it's a good move. I get the move. Your ceiling's higher for
oh yeah,
sure,
they're way
and
better.
yeah, they're way better. And like, this is basically a very similar move to what they did with James Harden, except Paul George is a better fit than James Harden, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
that's kind
He
of what
he
this is.
he thrives. He thrives in a secondary, tertiary role. That's the role he's going to be in. He's
Yep.
a great defender. Great
Right.
defender. I was thinking about how they lost Batum, and you think about their series with the Knicks. Batum was their main defender on Jalen Brunson. He was
Yeah.
guarding him, putting length on Jalen Brunson. Paul George is a huge upgrade over Nick Batum if that's who your Jalen Brunson stopper is going to be.
Yeah.
He hasn't
You think
really
about going
played.
up. You think about going up against the Jays. You think about going up against Jimmy Butler. If you got
Mhm,
to guard Donovan Mitchell, like Paul George is far like Nick. If Nick
mhm.
Batum was your answer before, and now you have Paul George, it's a
Yeah.
pretty big difference.
No, I mean it's a huge upgrade for them. My greater point, starting with my conversation about Embiid, is like I've seen a lot of people throw out there, this is now the best trio in the NBA and all that stuff that people like to do anytime there's a new signing anywhere. But it's just like Maxey's great. Love Tyrese Maxey. I
Yeah.
think he's just only going to continue to get better. He's really impressive on both ends of the court at this point. I'm super high on Maxey. I'm just not as high on Joel Embiid, and I'm not as high on Paul George. So it's like I don't know that everyone thinks of Embiid as a top 3 player in the NBA, top 4 player in the NBA. I don't see him that way, right? I see him as a top 10 player in the NBA for sure. But with his unreliability in the playoffs and just lack of success in the playoffs,
Yeah.
and how he's exhausted by the second quarter of every game, it's just like I just don't see it out of the guy. I hate his mentality on the court. He I think he makes excuses, and I think that's the issue that I have with Embiid. Paul George is kind of another one of those guys that seemingly
Yeah.
makes excuses throughout his career. So in terms of a mentality coming into this team, like Jimmy Butler was the guy for Philadelphia. Like that was the type of mindset they needed 4 years ago on that team. They needed like a true alpha on that team. Paul George is not an alpha. This is not an alpha.
The answer might be Tyrese Maxey's the alpha on that team. Like
He
that,
might be.
that might be
He
their
might be.
answer. Because the thing is, like, it's interesting what you say about Jimmy Butler versus Paul George, because mindset wise, you're right. That's what they needed. Skill set wise, Paul George is probably not even probably, he
Yeah.
is the better
Paul George
fit
is a great player.
than Jimmy Butler. And so it is interesting to think about the two of now. Here's the thing, whether it's Jimmy Butler, Paul George, or Joel Embiid, they all got to be active on the court to play. Like that's something that is going to matter no matter what. Is if they're not on the court, this
Paul
is all
George
completely
played
irrelevant.
74 games last year. Let's give him credit though.
Yeah, he also hadn't played over 60 games in 4 straight years before that, or over 50 games. I think it was over 50 games in 4 straight years before that. So, I think someone was pointing out that the last 2 times that he's played over 70 games have both been contract seasons. So, a man might like a little bag of money, wants to make sure that's secure. But
Someone's
yeah,
got to
I
pay
think
for the podcast equipment.
that's true. That's true. As we know, it's not always cheap. You got to make sure you have the top of the line equipment. But for the Sixers, so let me ask you this, Greg. So we just talked about the Knicks. We talked about the Sixers. as of today, we're recording this here July 2nd. If the Celtics are the number one favorites in the East, give me the next three that go behind them.
I'm gonna go Knicks because I just thought the Knicks were also already in that space before they made the deal. So I'm gonna go Knicks, Sixers, and Bucks. Knicks, Sixers, and Bucks. The Bucks obviously are the biggest question mark out of those three. I think the Magic are still interesting, adding KCP this offseason. I don't know that they're ready yet, though. If he becomes the player that he was 2 years ago, maybe, but he really struggled last year. And then the Pacers, man, I don't want to sleep on the Pacers, but dude, nobody can stop the Pacers. The Celtics said that was the hardest team they faced all postseason.
Yeah, no doubt. And like, they brought back Siakam. We knew that was going to happen. They brought back Obi Toppin. So, for now they're running it back. And I know a lot of people seem to be pretty high on Jarris Walker, who was their rookie they drafted last year, but didn't really play. It's a little bit clogged up at his position, but people seem to be high on him. So I'm sure if there's that many people that are, as enthused with him, they're going to find a way to try to make him into something. So, and they're a young team, right? So they just have room for internal development as well. So that's a big part with the Pacers. But yeah, I asked that question because I was curious to know, like, are the Bucks still that fourth team? I'm with you. I think they probably are until they're definitively not. Donovan Mitchell also signed his extension, so he will be with the Cavaliers here. Signed a 3-year extension with them, I believe a player option once he hits that 10-year mark so he can hit that Supermax deal. So at least for the next couple of years, Mitchell will be there. Obviously, trades can always happen. I'm interested. I think the Cavs have room to jump the Bucks, but they got to do something. If they just run it back as is, I'm not jumping them over the Bucks. But I think there's a move that could still be made later in the offseason, but that's got to happen first. I don't know. They kind of say they're not doing that, which I think is insanity. Like, I don't know what you've seen over these last 2 years that is like, yep, this is the team that can get by all these other teams that are making these moves. So we'll have to see. And then, you talk about the Magic. So the Magic are kind of that on that Pacers level, right? Of that up and coming team that potentially could make a jump. And the KCP move, really like it. 3 years, 66 million. I think he fits in, pretty perfectly with what they need. And they're also not, going in so heavily on a guy that is going to prevent them from making any other major moves down the line if they need to make trades or whatever else they might need to do to adjust their roster. And so now you get a pretty nice defensive backcourt with Jalen Suggs and KCP. You add that to Paolo and Franz. You get Wendell Carter Jr., who I like a lot. They just actually did re-sign Mo Wagner back here as well. And so the Magic, I don't know if KCP, I think to your point, I don't think it changes their world, but I think it's a guy that can help them. I mean, KCP is a 2-time champion, right?
I love KCP.
And then with the Nuggets,
he's one of my favorite non-Celtics in the league. I think that he's the best screen navigator at like the 2 position in the entire league. I've always been impressed with his ability to guard, and he's a decent 3-point shooter. He has had seasons where he's not shot the ball great, but overall, I feel good when I see KCP going up to take a jump shot. If I'm a Magic fan, especially coming off of a season in which you're trusting Jalen Suggs, Markelle Fultz, Gary Harris to take threes. Like, I think
which they brought back Gary Harris, which I thought was hilarious because I feel like
Gary Harris should not be making more money than Kelly Oubre.
Yeah, I think it's about the same, but they shouldn't be they're not in the same tax bracket, right? That shouldn't be the case.
Man. Kelly Oubre, I feel like either he really likes playing in Philly or his agent sucks, or he's his own agent.
Yeah, I don't know. I was shocked by that Kelly Oubre number, just as you were. But I feel like Gary Harris has been in more trade rumors than almost anyone besides Miles Turner, and somehow he's still on the Magic. I don't really understand how that relationship has worked. But yeah, you're right. I think the point being of what this original question was is that there's the Celtics, there's the Sixers and Knicks. The Bucks, I think, are going to kind of live in their own category. And I think there's a little bit like the rest of the East. You know what I mean? There's this. It's kind of like the top tiers.
Here's the thing about the Bucks, though. Will Giannis hasn't been healthy the last 2 postseasons?
Yeah.
So, like, if he's healthy, let's see them with Giannis healthy in a postseason, because nobody wants to play him in 7 games.
100%. And my biggest, before Giannis got hurt, my biggest question for the Bucks was, is Middleton ever going to come back? And Middleton finally had some games where it was like, oh, this is the Chris Middleton that if you pair with Dame, who maybe comes in shape this season, as Doc Rivers informed us, if he comes in shape, I wouldn't count Damian Lillard out as saying his best days are behind him yet. I'm not there yet. And especially if you pair him with, if Middleton can give you what he gave them in the Pacer series to try to, got them to, I think, 6 games, that's a team that can absolutely jump right back up there. And despite the fact they're not going to have great depth, they're getting older. Giannis is still Giannis. I still think Giannis, aside from Jokic, is probably the most terrifying individual player in the league because of what he can do on both sides of the ball. So I think it's going to be fascinating to see if they find a way to make any other moves. DeLon Wright was a small move they did make, which, to be fair, campaign Pat Bev, I'll take DeLon Wright over the two of them. So that's at least a minor upgrade for the Bucks right there, in my opinion. But let's keep it going here. We talked about the Magic. Let's hit a couple more teams that I got here. The Thunder, Greg. This is a team that I know you talked about after the Caruso trade, which we talked about briefly because that's your guy. Ends up on the Thunder for Josh Giddey. We mentioned earlier they get Isaiah Hartenstein, $30 million per season. A little bit of an overpay, but they got the cap space, and he's a perfect fit for their team, for what they need next to Chet. We talked all season about the lack of size. With their lack of size, I was never truly worried about a finals matchup against the Thunder. But now they can really kind of do that 5-out, maintain size, and they got a lot of depth. They also re-signed Aaron Wiggins and Isaiah Joe to some impressive deals. It kind of feels like the Thunder are starting to make a move. And I say make a move and not make their move because they still have a bunch of moves that they can make. But the Thunder are really positioning themselves to be like, we're no longer a team that you're going to be curious about if we're a contender. We're definitively a contender. And if we need to get better, we've got plenty of options to do it, especially now that they have a $30 million salary on their books to go with 1,900 picks or whatever they have still coming in.
They're really good. The Thunder are
Yeah.
really good, man. Hartenstein is great. And I think he, with his passing ability and his sheer size, he's exactly what they needed this year. You know what I mean? Like they could not rebound. Hartenstein's a great rebounder, and they're going to have somebody finally to protect Chet. They signed Bismack Biyombo, hoping that he was
Yeah.
going to be the answer as their big man last season. Like Hartenstein is such an upgrade, and the fact that they were able to overpay him because of their unique situation with so many young guys on their team, where Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren are still on their rookie deals, like they are going to be set up for success. I think my pick is to come out of the West right now is the OKC Thunder, and I would put a lot of money on that. I think the Thunder losing KCP is huge, man. Back-to-back seasons losing in such important role players. I don't know what the Nuggets are doing. I think that I would pick the OKC Thunder right now to come out of the West, and I wouldn't think twice about it.
I mean, I think you kind of have to, right? I mean, it's between them, and if you think the T-Wolves have learned their lessons from, now they haven't really made any moves, so they're basically the same team, but maybe that they've grown internally from getting to the Western Conference Finals. I think someone pointed out, like, I really do feel like even though Luka was a bad matchup for them, it did feel like they were so excited, and this is one of the something that the Jays have been through, is that it's a long grind to get through the NBA postseason. And it probably felt like beating the Nuggets, who I think everyone was kind of the looming giant of the playoffs. Once they beat them, it probably felt like, man, ain't nobody fucking stopping us now. Look at this.
Right.
And
this is what I said during that series, right? And I've said it multiple times on this pod. The Celtics didn't have to play their best basketball until they had to play their best basketball.
Right.
And the T-Wolves peaked. Right. They peaked in that Nuggets series because they had to play their best to beat the Nuggets. And it's really hard to do that for 4 straight series. And they ran into Luka Doncic. But I do want to talk about the Mavs as well, because I thought the Mavs.
Yeah, that was the next game I wanted to go to.
Made some really interesting moves. Obviously, the big one, getting Klay Thompson in a sign and trade deal. Apparently, Klay had options to go to LA for more money, and he decided that he wanted to go to the beautiful state of Texas, where he doesn't have to pay state taxes. But then another move, so they lose Derrick Jones Jr. Derrick Jones Jr. He signed somewhere, I forget where.
Signed with the Clippers.
Signed with the Clippers. But then they get Najee Marshall from the Pelicans, who I really like. I love his tenacity on defense. I think he's going to be the type of wing that they need to go up against a team like the Boston Celtics. I think Derrick Jones Jr. was okay for them, but by the end of the series, the Celtics played him off the court. He wasn't big enough. He couldn't shoot well enough. I think Najee Marshall is a really nice move there, but Klay Thompson, very interesting pickup for them. They couldn't hit anything against the Celtics. They could not hit 3-pointers, and Klay Thompson, if he can do one thing still in the NBA, it's hit 3-pointers.
Yeah, and then there's another move they made too. Quentin Grimes and Josh Green actually goes out in the Clay deal. So
They got
defensive,
Grimes?
they got Grimes. Yeah.
Oh,
So
that's a great deal.
that's kind of the slight defensive downgrade. But when you talk about potential shooting and having different options like that, Quentin Grimes is certainly going to give you at least a better option from the perimeter. The Clay signing's interesting, right? Because I think the shooting is still going to be there. Even like I know Clay is being thought of as, and he is diminished, right? Like, there's not even being thought of. He is diminished from what his peak was. There's no doubt about it. Guy's still going to be able to shoot, right? And when you have a guy like Luka, when you have kind of a heliocentric guy that just demands so much attention, you need guys that can spray, right? And he's got Kyrie out there, but there wasn't really. I mean, Tim Hardaway was honestly the next best shooting option, right? And they didn't want to play him because we saw what happened when they put him in after Luka fouled out. He got hunted, and the Celtics won Game 3. Like that didn't go so well. So now you're able to basically you're trading out that Tim Hardaway spot for Clay. That's kind of what they just did here. So in that sense, it's a very big upgrade. Now, Clay on the defensive end, and this is the part where if I'm Mavericks, I still think it's worth it for $16 million a year. Like Clay is still a guy that can play in the NBA, right? He's just, you have to recalibrate who you think he is and what the expectations are for him. Defensively is where he just hasn't been the same since he came back from injury. I guess off the bounce as well.
They
Too.
basically had him guard force.
Yeah, and so I'm curious to see what that fit looks like. And I know I'll be honest, I don't have a huge opinion on Najee Marshall. Him for Derrick Jones Jr. I think you could. To me, it's maybe slightly a wash or close to. I don't think it's a complete game changer.
Najee Marshall can like play up to the like a legit power forward, small ball 5. He's like a dog. Derrick Jr. can't do that, and I think they needed another guy, especially losing Josh Green and his physicality. I think it's important for them to bring in somebody with more physicality, and I like Najee Marshall a lot. I love his mentality. Derrick Jones is a nice player, fits well with Luka on the lobs and everything, but at the end of the day, they need to win a championship, and I think you can game plan Derrick Jones out a little bit easier than you can Najee Marshall. I not by a lot, to your point. It's
right.
Like
this is kind of like my point. Yeah.
But I just think he fits like that PJ Washington kind of body type that was effective against the Celtics.
So now you double down on that for sure. Yeah. And so where do you think that puts them at? We just talked about, the Thunder feel like they've made all the right moves. They basically ran back the same team, and now they're adding Caruso as an upgrade to Gideon. They added Isaiah Hartenstein. And then you look at, the T-Wolves got to be up there. So like the West is still loaded, but I think it's pretty murky. So would you really would you put the Mavs in that? Let's say the Nuggets, even though they lose KCP, they're still going to be in that top area of contention. Would you put the Mavs right behind that though?
Yeah, I think the top teams right now are OKC, the Mavs, and the T-Wolves. Right, like the Nuggets. The Nuggets will be in there just because of Jokic. But
it's like Giannis in the East. You still got to have you got Jokic.
I think they're definitely a little bit below now though without KCP. And I mean, Michael Porter Jr. has a like medically red flagged back in just entire body. At any moment he could be out for the year. You know what I mean? So it'll be really interesting to see what happens in the West. I'm just trying to look at some other teams that may have signed free agents here. Memphis coming back. I think Memphis could be interesting this year with Ja being healthy. Full year of Marcus Smart. They got Zach Edey now just to be big and actually rebound for Jaren Jackson because he can't do that. With Desmond Bane, they had a lot of guys that got some good minutes last year. So Memphis is a team that I could see kind of sneaking back into the conversation. If you want to talk about Houston still maybe has a move to make this offseason. I saw a report they're not giving Jalen Green and Şengün the max extensions, which I thought was pretty interesting that neither of them got that. So I'm wondering if that's for trade trade
Yeah,
purposes
I
or
feel like
anything
I
like
mean,
that?
it seems like the Rockets are kinda lingering on every big potential trade that might be out there, and those were kind of their 2 moves to make. Is
Mhm,
like
and they got
one of
Reed
those
Sheppard in the
guys.
draft?
Yes, they did. They did get Reed Sheppard in the draft, so sniper out of Kentucky. That's another guy that's I would have imagined they kind of envision him as a Fred VanVleet replacement in about a year or 2, is kind of
Mhm.
how they see that. Let me ask you about this one, down here in Texas. CP3 to the Spurs.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
fun,
listen,
man.
Wemby needs a point guard. I don't care how old CP is. He can get a lob to Wemby. He'll get Wemby plenty of opportunities. I absolutely love that fit. I would love to see this. One, because they're close in proximity to us, and so the better they are, the better chance that we're either going to go down to a game, or if they come up here to Austin, that we're going to get to see them play. And Wemby's so much fun to watch that I want his development to be aided correctly. And I think he's ready to take off. Like, I don't know what the odds are going to be for him making all NBA next year, but I'll put some money on that. I'll put some money on Wemby making all NBA next year. And you get CP3 with them. They also feel like a team that's kind of always in the mix of like could make a move. Like I've seen them rumored about Lowry Markkanen as well. Don't know what that. I think they want to hold on to Devin Vassell, which is probably um, the biggest blocker to that potentially happening. And I like Devin Vassell as well. So I like the direction that's heading, but I think CP3 just from a veteran standpoint, I was a little surprised. Like from the Spurs sense, I would 100% get it. From the
Mhm.
CP3 perspective, I was a little surprised because it felt like he's still that guy without a ring. And he's the new Al Horford, right? One of the guys that's played the most playoff games without getting that ring. And so I was a little surprised because the Spurs, even if they're going to be better next year, they're not going to be a championship team, right? Unless something crazy dramatic happens that we just don't see as of this recording. So I wonder if CP3 did this with a little bit of like a handshake deal, like, hey, let's see where the season goes. And
Mhm.
if by midseason, like I'll do everything I can. And we've seen him do it in OKC several
Yep.
years ago when he got traded from the Rockets, and everyone thought that was going to be a rebuild project. And next thing you know, CP3 had him as a 5 seed or a 4 seed, whatever they were in the bubble. And so I don't think necessarily that full transformation is going to happen. But if they're not quite in the mix, I wonder if the Spurs kind of were like handshake agreement. We'll get you to a contender, at
Yeah.
the trade deadline. If we're not, at that point of somehow, Wemby's just on another level and puts us in the 4 or 5 seed or
What'd he
something,
sign for, like,
which
12 million?
it was 11 million. I saw Keith Smith had an interesting note that particular number with all these new CBA rules and regulations, and hopefully I'm gonna hit up Keith and see if we can get him on the show here in the next couple of weeks or so to kind of like help us break down all the nuance that goes along with it. That particular number is very specific to certain exceptions that exist in the CBA that allow him to be traded to almost anybody minus like a handful of teams
Okay.
because of like that second apron issue. And so it seemed to be very intentional that there's that number 11 million what was settled on. So I think that will be something to keep an eye on. One other move that I wanted to get your thoughts on here, and then we can quickly kind of give our draft take thoughts for the Celtics. Hawks and Pels made a kind of under the radar trade. DeJounte Murray going to the Pelicans for
Mm.
Dyson Daniels, Larry Nance, and a couple of picks. I know one of them's I think a 2025 pick, which was be a loaded draft. I think that's unprotected. There might be one more swap or something like that. Kind of a low market for DeJounte Murray, and I know it was said a lot that the market for DeJounte Murray was higher than Trae Young. And if this was the DeJounte Murray market, man, you and I have been low on the Trae Young stock for a while, but that stock must be really low if this was the return that the Hawks thought was better than what the Trae Young market was.
Yeah, I didn't see the report that this was the better return. Where did you see that?
Well, not that it was the better return, but that people that they were more likely to trade DeJounte Murray because the Trae Young trade market was so bad that
And
this was going to be a
that's
better a
crazy.
better value. I'm not saying it would have been the same exact trade, but it was a
Right.
better value on
Gotcha,
average of
gotcha,
what was coming
gotcha.
back.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the Pelicans, it's kind of interesting. Like, I was just talking about teams that might sneak into contention in the West. Um, I haven't really given the Pelicans too much thought just because there's still the Brandon Ingram domino to fall, and
Yeah.
then Zion's health obviously is a huge issue. So, at the end of the day, if Zion's not healthy, then that move doesn't do anything for me, regardless. With the Hawks, We'll see if they move Trey. I don't know if they're planning on moving Trey as well. They had the number 1 pick in the draft. They drafted the French kid. So maybe they
Man,
just
big
decide
big
to
draft for the Frenchies.
dude, a lot of French guys
A
drafted. A
lot
lot
of
of French
French.
guys.
Was it
3
4
in the top
guys in the
10.
first round, 3 in the top 6?
Yeah.
I just came back from a bachelor party. One of our buddy Mark, one of his good friends when he lived in London, was this French guy. Shout out to my man Ellie over there, and he never really played basketball. So I was trying to ask him a little bit. He's more of like a F1 racing, played tennis and stuff growing up, and our friend Mark was always like, he's a pretty natural athlete. And so we had a basketball hoop at the house we were staying at. Dude's never shot. Dude, we were playing knockout with like 10, 12 guys. Guy was coming in second place every time. It was really impressive. So apparently there's something going on in French with hoops and everybody's getting into it. So yeah, big year. Excited to see what that means for the future of Olympic basketball. I'm sure it won't make, I mean, we're going to get to watch Wemby. This Olympics will be awesome. But I'm sure that young crop of French players in probably the next Olympics is really going to be something to watch for Team USA as we look at future competition.
Hey,
I think
Will,
we hit on just about, yeah, go ahead.
I want to throw 2 names out there for you just to tell me what you think about as like where they might end up. But then I do have to go. I'm not going to be able to do the draft thoughts. I'm getting a bunch of text messages that I got to wrap it up. But
That sounds good.
So first name, Kyle Anderson. Unrestricted free agent, hasn't signed anywhere yet. Any thoughts on where Kyle Anderson ideal fit for him? Because I thought he was really important for the T-Wolves.
I don't know if I have an ideal fit. I think I did see a connection somewhere. It was an aggregate site about the Celtics maybe having a look. I don't know how he would be taking a super discount
That would
if
be
that was
nice.
the case.
Can't
I
shoot.
love the
That would
idea.
be nice.
Can't shoot, but I think he can, he would be a guy that you could see playing some of those Al Horford minutes, right? That could really be a small ball 5. I mean, we've seen what Tatum, has become as far as his physicality, as being a rebounder, and the fact that you have a bunch of guys that can guard up. I really like that fit for the Celtics if it's actually a possibility. Slow-mo's kind of like the Nick Batum mold, minus the shooting. Like, he's just a great connection piece, right? He's a connector that I think gives you another versatile option that you can utilize. What's the other name you got?
DeMar DeRozan.
That's a good one, man. I like DeMar. I think he's still very good. No clue what the right fit for him. I have no idea. Like, I think the Lakers are rumored because they're just like struck out on everything, and it's just like, give us another guy that can handle the ball and score. I think the spacing would be super clunky with LeBron and AD. I really don't know what the fit would be. I did see that he's likely to maybe take a 1-year deal and then try to, re-enter free agency next year. Do you have a particular team in mind for him that you were thinking of?
Not yet. I'm just I'm going through the list on NBA.com of just like all the remaining free agents, and there are a ton of them. So the baby coming soon. Hopefully by the next time we pod, there are still some free agents that have yet to be signed that we can talk about. But regardless, we'll be able to talk about where all of these next dominoes fall. But I do have to run. So let's wrap this up. Okay.
All right. We're going to wrap this up. I know you see on the screen here some draft thoughts. I will make a separate video that we'll have some draft thoughts on that I will get up for you guys here. But that's going to do it for this episode. Greg might be having a baby right now. So we are going to wrap this up, send you out of here with some Black Sheep Optimists, and we will see you guys later. Peace. It feels like summer, baby. Oh, mama, feel like summer. New season got me seeing new